Thanks for joining. We'll get started with the webinar in just a second to let a couple more people dial in, so sit tight and we'll get started in a moment. Thanks again for joining. My name is Cassie Rowe, Content Marketing Specialist at 451 Research. Today's webinar, 2019 Trends in Managed Services and Hosting, will be presented by Liam Eagle and Aaron Sherrill. Before we dive into the content, I just want to give a brief introduction to 451 Research for those of you who aren't familiar with us. 451 Research is a top-tier research and advisory firm headquartered in New York City. Our team of more than 100 analysts covers more than 2,000 technology vendors and service providers every year. 451 Research presents unique insight into emerging disruptive technologies and the companies taking them to market, and deliver that insight via syndicated research, advisory services, and live events around the world. Before I turn it over to today's presenters, there's a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. The webinar slides can be downloaded in the resources section of the On24 platform. There is also a link where you may download a complimentary excerpt of the 2019 Trends Report associated with today's presentation. You can also submit questions to today's presenters in the same platform for the Q&A at the end of the webinar, and the recording of today's webinar will be available shortly after today's session. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Liam and Aaron.
Okay, thanks, Cassie. This is Liam. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. So we'll introduce ourselves a little bit more thoroughly in a moment. But today you'll be hearing from me and from Aaron Sherrill as we examine some of the trends that we are seeing in the cloud hosting and managed services markets. These trends are all presented with kind of a mind to their impact on service providers. So our discussion will include some of our recommendations for how service providers can think strategically about how about some of these things and what factors might determine winners and losers in the space as a result. And just to reiterate what Cassie was saying, in case anyone's sort of rolling in now, as we go through the session today, you may have some questions. We have saved some time at the end to answer those questions. We will probably save all the questions until the end of the sort of scheduled presentation, but you should be able to submit them throughout the session using the sort of features of the webinar software, and we will review them and get to them at the end. So I wanted to just start out with a little bit of context here. One of the purposes of identifying and examining these market trends is to help steer our coverage of the cloud hosting and managed services market over the coming year. So this subject, cloud hosting and managed services, is one of the practice areas for 451 Research, but we also regard our sort of our coverage of managed services as being closely connected to some of these other topics, such as, data centers and infrastructure, cloud transformation, information security, as well as some of the other channels. And so within the scope of managed services and hosting, the topics that we will cover today partly serve as sort of areas of focus for our future research or for some of the work that we'll be doing this year, including both our short form and our long form reports that are published within the managed services and hosting channel. And before we move on, I just wanted to share a quick note on the sort of data sources that we'll be pulling from. So throughout today's presentation, we will be sharing a variety of charts and figures and data points, and those will mostly come from 3 different sources. So the first is our Market Monitor service, which incorporates input and feedback from a very large group of service providers to develop market sizing and growth projections for various technology markets, among them managed services, cloud, and hosting. The second source is Voice of the Enterprise, which is our quarterly demand-side survey of IT buyers and decision makers. So we call it VOTE for short. VOTE is also divided into a variety of practice areas, and most of the VOTE data that we'll be sharing today comes from our cloud hosting and managed services study. And finally, we will share a little bit of data from our Voice of the Service Provider, which is another survey practice that's pretty similar to VOTE in its structure, but it's focused on tracking the technology requirements, the purchasing decisions, and the product strategy of service providers. So if during or after today's session you have any questions about any of the data resources, or if you'd like to take a closer look at any of these sources, perhaps submit a question via the tool, and we can just sort of follow up on that offline. Or if you'd like to just, if you have a contact at 451 and you want to sort of, have a look at some of the data sources, reach out to us, and we'd love to show them to you. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there are 2 of us presenting on today's session. My name is Liam Eagle. I am a research manager at 451 Research. On the qualitative side of our research, I run the managed services and hosting team, and on the quantitative side, I run the cloud hosting and managed services study for Voice of the Enterprise, which, as I mentioned, produces a lot of the data points that you'll be seeing today. Now, I'll allow Aaron to introduce himself here.
Yeah, hello everyone, Aaron Sherrill. I'm covering the managed services and managed security services space at 451, and prior to coming on 451 about 2 years ago, I worked in managed services for about 15 years, a variety of different roles: Chief Technology Officer, Vice President of Information Security. So I'm very familiar with the service provider space and are able to lend that experience to our channel development today.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. So let's dive right into it. We wanted to begin with a high-level view of the managed services, the hosting, and cloud market. The data on this slide is from our Market Monitor service, which I mentioned a moment ago. It provides market sizing and growth projections based on revenue information, both shared privately with us or published publicly from a large group of service providers, as well as from our enterprise survey data sources. So it can be segmented into a pretty broad array of individual service categories, but in this case, we're rolling them up into managed services, application services, and infrastructure. It's worth pointing out here that while we're tracking hosted applications, this data set doesn't count pure play SaaS companies, which would obviously have a huge impact on market sizing. But we find that that doesn't really fall into the context of service providers that we're looking for here. Overall, it currently estimates the cloud hosting and managed services market to be a $143 billion market, and anticipates that growing at a CAGR of 14% from 2016 through 2021 to reach $181 billion market in 2021. So market sizing and the growth projections show that the managed services portion of this market is now approaching the infrastructure portion in terms of the size. So it is 33% compared to 36%. And this segment of the market is growing at a faster rate than either the application services or the infrastructure. This is sort of a basic market trend and market condition that underlies some of the trends that we'll be discussing today. The sort of growing significance of managed services as a portion of this market. For service providers, it's really crystallizing the fact that a lot of the value that they bring to their customers is most directly focused on the services that they actually wrap around the infrastructure, as the, in light of many of the changes in how infrastructure is delivered, the actual core infrastructure components become a little bit more commoditized. Managed infrastructure providers from across the market are sort of recognizing these conditions. They're leaning into their managed services as key drivers of growth, and they're doing that either by expanding the scope of their services or by extending the reach of those services onto an additional infrastructure and application environments, including those operated by third parties, or they're doing both of those things, extending the sort of scope of their services and extending the reach of that extended set of services. We also see a broad range of businesses from a variety of, sort of adjacent markets, really exploring or actively developing managed services as an important component of their future strategy. And this is a topic that we'll explore in a bit of detail later in this session. So there are a few other reasons for that shift within the managed infrastructure services space, away from really focusing on the infrastructure component to focusing a lot more on the managed services component. And those have to do with sort of the ongoing changes to what are, widely considered the most effective infrastructure venues for executing applications. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. Excuse me. In order to understand how workloads are being executed today and how they're being executed in the future, in a voice of the enterprise, we ask businesses what the primary environment for executing workloads is today and what they expect it to be 2 years from now. And we ask about the primary environment here because we see this increasing potential for workloads to be executed across multiple different environments. There are really two key points I would take away from this slide. First of all, including software as a service, cloud services are nearly ubiquitous. More than 90% of businesses tell us that they have some of these cloud services in place. Secondly, over the next 2 years, businesses expect the off-premises service provider operated environment, so public cloud infrastructure, software as a service, hosted private cloud, even hosted sort of non-cloud infrastructure environments. That portion goes from being the primary venue for 48% of workloads to being 66% of workloads by 2020. So the greatest increases here are to software as a service and to public cloud infrastructure, with smaller increases for hosted private cloud and an overall sort of decrease in non-cloud hosted services as a sort of a primary venue for executing workloads. Now, this is sort of an aggregate view across all applications. We ask about a few different categories of applications and workloads, and there is some variation between how businesses tend to handle different types of workloads. So, employee productivity functions, for instance, are already pretty strongly served by SaaS, and that momentum is continuing. Data analytics and business intelligence type functions we see moving from on-premises, in many cases on-premises, on-premises and even non-cloud sort of legacy on-premises environments into hosted private cloud and public cloud environments, so kind of a combination. And then core back-end business functions we see having a little bit more gravity around sort of on-premises cloud environments. However, the overall shift of workloads is sort of toward these off-premises and cloud environments. And from the service provider perspective, particularly if they're sort of a managed infrastructure provider, if these businesses want to remain important to their customers, if they want to remain sort of relevant to how they're executing their sort of IT processes, they really need to be looking at shifting their models to accommodate this. And this shift is kind of central to the key challenges and the key opportunities that this market's going to face and encounter in the next few years. So along with the sort of where does the workload sit, we track the movement of the IT budget, which illustrates a couple of additional details about this shift toward the cloud. So we ask businesses whether they expect spending in each of these categories to increase, decrease, or stay the same during the next 12 months. One of the things that we see pretty clearly is that this sort of shift to cloud that we were describing on the previous slide is not absolute. Businesses expect spending increases, sort of a net spending increase in almost every category of service here, with the exception being this sort of hosted non-cloud infrastructure, where more businesses expect to see a decrease than an increase. But when it comes to public cloud services and things like software as a service and public cloud infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, the intent to increase spending really greatly outpaces the intent to decrease there. Nobody is reducing their spending in these categories, and the significant majority is increasing in each of these categories. We also ask businesses what their single largest areas of increase and decrease are, and those also favor increases to cloud platforms significantly. So the top drivers for both spending decreases and spending increases kind of describe this movement of workloads, because in both cases they describe either migrating workloads out of this environment, therefore spending decrease, or migrating workloads from other environments into this environment, therefore spending increase. So it really describes this movement of workloads sort of out of these non-cloud environments and into cloud environments. So overall, while the survey responses don't necessarily show businesses shutting off spending on hosted private cloud or even non-cloud hosted services necessarily, we definitely see this sort of increasing concentration of spending, or rather concentration of new spending being around this sort of public cloud infrastructure, around SaaS, and around platforms as a service. So service providers, including hosting providers, data center companies, and other businesses, that want to continue to be engaged in how customers are executing these IT functions, should be focused on sort of how am I accommodating this shift. That can include not only supplying pieces of this cloud platform, but also helping to develop the strategy, to perform the migration, to secure the workloads in new environments, and in many cases to continue providing infrastructure and application services that complement or support or sit around the edges of public cloud, as well as providing tools and resources for sort of managing the overall environment. And so I'd like to talk really quickly about the idea of digital transformation in the enterprise and how the effects of that are sort of felt up into the service provider market and beyond, into their suppliers of hardware and software and other tools. So by digital transformation, we're really talking about enterprises making deep, significant fundamental changes to their business processes, incorporating technology into those processes, impacting the people, the platforms, and the processes within their organizations, really becoming a lot more like technology companies in the process. And that is really sort of transforming their requirements from their suppliers. We see a pretty near universal intent to undergo digital transformation among the businesses that we survey. Excuse me. As they look for ways that, applying technology can drive specific business benefits. And in our Vote Cloud Hosting and Managed Services study, we asked the businesses what stage they are at in the development of their digital transformation strategy. 46% tell us that they are at the execution stage of that transformation, while another 49% tell us that they are at least at the consideration stage. So, the exact targets for transformation, the metrics by which they're going to judge their success, the particular outcomes they're pursuing, a lot of those things are going to vary from business to business. But one of the extremely consistent outcomes across all of this is complexity. So businesses will increasingly encounter reasons to look outside their own organizations for help addressing complexity. And this is a significant part of the future opportunity for managed services. It's also a pretty significant part of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about and address today. So among the service providers we survey with Voice of the Service, 77% of those tell us that they have identified at least some level of transformation as necessary to support their businesses, with 12% telling us that they have to transform completely. And this is both based on the change in the infrastructure platform capabilities and the things that those platforms are making possible for businesses. And as I kind of alluded to on the previous slide, because the business intends to transform, or the enterprise intends to transform, the service provider's got to transform in order to support that. And we can even extend that a step further to include, the businesses that supply hardware, software, and other technologies to the service providers. They have to transform the way, they're doing licensing, or the way that they're doing distribution. This transformation has a pretty significant sort of, ripple effect all the way up the supply chain. So with that, I'd like to dig a little deeper on some of the specific trends that we have been observing. So I'll start with our first trend, which is service providers from various categories converging on this notion of cloud enablement services and on the market for these services. So as we've just discussed, cloud is now this sort of mainstream component of enterprise IT. Businesses in almost every category, almost every size are looking to off-premises service provider operated infrastructure and application environments, including SaaS, including public cloud, including hosted private cloud and other services, as sort of critical pieces in that process of transformation, as just sort of standard parts of their IT playbook. They're looking to increase agility. They want to reduce the cost of IT operations. They want to build new revenue-generating projects. But reaching these outcomes, it's easy to, well, okay, it's one thing to pick up an application out of your data center and putting the application into public cloud. But it's another thing to have that be performant or available or secure or cost effective. And spreading operations out across this broadening IT landscape also adds a lot of complexity. So in response to that growing demand, we see service providers from a pretty wide variety of categories kind of converging on this market for cloud enablement, hoping to apply their existing expertise to these challenges. That includes businesses with roots in the managed hosting market. We see data center companies building this sort of cloud enablement practice, telecommunications companies, hardware companies, software companies, along with a pretty wide range of small MSPs and VARs. And a lot of these different companies have, unique capabilities to offer. So the appetite for the full set of cloud services and the complexities that come with it is leading, the businesses that are adopting these technologies to look outside their own organizations, outside of their own IT department, for strategic consulting, for operational management, and for security expertise to effectively handle workloads that are being placed into cloud. And more importantly, to enable the business to actually extract those benefits that they intended to gain from using cloud, whether that's performance, cost, flexibility, availability, access to advanced functions and capabilities that they would not otherwise be able to sort of source internally. So this chart I'm showing you now is from our Voice of the Enterprise study, where we asked businesses what types of skills they were most likely to seek out from a provider of cloud enablement services. In another vote survey, which is called Digital Pulse, which is more of sort of an overarching look at the state of business IT. We also ask about the top skills gaps, or the areas of skills shortages that are being sort of most acutely felt by IT organizations. And in fact, in both of these questions, the basic expertise around the cloud platform, the public cloud platform, and information security skills are at the top of both of these lists. So they're the main skills gaps, and they're also the main skills for which organizations would look outside the organizations to fill. That's not a surprising connection, but I think it's worth pointing out. So this is sort of a basic fact of cloud-driven transformation. As much as businesses recognize the need, the skills to implement cloud effectively are in pretty short supply. And that skills gap is becoming more acute as adoption continues, as platforms become more complex. The need for these skills is increasing, and the supply of these skills is not increasing at the same rate. I'm kind of describing the premise of the cloud enablement role here, where the service provider is basically supplying the skills that these organizations lack, enabling them to get to the benefits of cloud that they want. And I think that the concentration of these skills in that service provider layer, benefits both the vendors, sort of higher up the supply chain, as it makes those skills and as a result, those platforms accessible to a broader set of customers. So, the hyperscale cloud providers can't really build these services practices at scale, and the enterprises, are struggling to access these skills or struggling to acquire these skills internally. It sort of benefits both sides to have this skill set concentrated in a service provider space. And so just beyond that sort of basic platform security expertise requirement at the top of this list, a little further down the list, some of the items translate a little bit more directly into, things you can imagine being services and offerings things like designing and implementing cloud environments, orchestrating and managing systems, applying or managing DevOps practices, helping to ensure compliance in the cloud. These are all, really things that service providers can build a business around. There's really no template for cloud enablement. The requirements are really driven by the needs of the business in question. And some of these are going to be, some of the things on this list here are going to turn out to be sort of specialized niche skills. But some of those specialized skills, some of those niches are pretty big. And these will be areas around which service providers can differentiate and really set themselves apart in this sort of cloud enablement world. Another thing to look at here, just as there's no sort of specific template for cloud enablement, there's also not a widespread understanding of how or when to consume these services, which I think is kind of both an opportunity and a challenge for service providers. So looking a little bit more closely at some of these services, we asked businesses, what types of challenges they face as they implement cloud platforms. And as you can see, a significant portion of firms told us that they had challenges applying governance and compliance to cloud deployments. They're having challenges with migration and integration, with optimizing for cost, with refactoring applications to run in cloud, optimizing for performance. We also asked them which of these challenges they'd be likely to work with a provider of, managed or professional services to address, and that is the lighter blue bars that sit underneath the darker blue bars. And, we asked this question a year ago, and we asked this question very recently, and we've really seen growth year over year in both the portion of businesses that say, yes, this is a challenge for me, and the portion of businesses that say, yes, I'm seeking somebody to help me with this challenge. But the portion that's actually planning to seek assistance or is actually seeking assistance with these challenges continues to be, a fairly small portion of those businesses that are facing the challenge, with the major exception there being sort of migration and integration, where it's a little closer. This is partly an issue of market education. I think that, in our sort of more in-depth engagements with enterprises, we often find that businesses aren't fully aware of what kind of services are available, again, with migration kind of being the major exception here, or the extent of the sort of value to which these services might deliver. So for instance, the 47% of businesses here are saying that they're struggling to optimize cloud infrastructure for cost, but only 17% of them say that they're going out and actually asking them or having someone sort of help them do that. There's a real opportunity there in that sort of gap for a service provider to provide a valuable service that helps to optimize cloud infrastructure for cost, but I think that right now the market doesn't have a full understanding of exactly what the impact of that would look like. How much cost are we talking about? And fortunately, that's the kind of service where the value of the service is pretty clearly defined by if the service the cost of the service could even be defined by the depth of the savings that they're able to produce. So we really look at the gaps on this chart as sort of the untapped opportunities that can be filled by service providers. But it's sort of got to be the service providers who are able to demonstrate to clients that they can actually effectively address these challenges, and that there's a sort of a core value to that. Now, we've actually done some surveying around the perception of the value of these services, and the good news is that generally speaking, even among businesses that aren't using managed services principally because they say they have the capabilities in-house to do it themselves, they still recognize that, taking all of the factors into account, the staffing costs and the cost of acquiring expertise and all the other components involved, that generally speaking, the managed services are delivering value that makes them worth what they cost. And so as service providers kind of converge on this enablement space, we wanted to just give you some key points to take away from this, and we'll do this for each of the trends that we look at. All service providers, are sort of forced to understand and accommodate the role of public cloud in their clients' world. Customers of every type are engaging with cloud infrastructure. They're turning to the hyperscale public cloud vendors to do it. Service providers have to recognize strategically that developing a level of expertise around deploying and operating workloads on these platforms is, the best way to remain a part of their customers' plans. Otherwise, they really risk losing these customers to either to the sort of do-it-yourself use of the cloud platforms directly, or to other providers that are able to provide this kind of engagement. And they really need to educate customers on the sort of value of some of these capabilities. So as I was just describing, many of the things that we track are really challenging for businesses when it comes to cloud execution. But apart from that sort of well understood migration piece, we don't see really significant segments of these respondents turning to third parties for enablement assistance. And I think that, we can pretty confidently say that's partly due to ignorance of the sort of depth and the capability of these services. So the service providers really have to do some extra work to position themselves as strategic partners in this regard and really sort of illustrate the value of some of these services. So we wanted to sort of highlight, the sort of winners and losers in each of these cases. It's pretty straightforward. The sort of losers is pretty straightforward in this case. The transformation is happening at every business. The use of public cloud is happening at every business. So, for service providers, that if they don't think that their customers are using cloud, cloud services, they're just sort of, that probably means their customers aren't telling them. So service providers that keep their heads in the sand and just imagine that their customers are not using public cloud, they're going to lose. And then, we don't see a lot of opportunity for the service providers who turn around and try to compete directly against the hyperscalers. There's very few examples now of, successful, what we might call alternative clouds. There are certainly a few out there, and that they might have, value based on geography or some unique feature, but the sort of era of where the time when we might have considered sort of a price or performance alternative to public cloud is quickly passing when they're sort of feature incomplete. And then sort of winning in this space is, it obviously requires a level of expertise in helping customers understand what they're going to do with public cloud, but it also requires a level of differentiation, which means specializing in certain vertical markets, geographies, technologies. There's also an advantage to bringing some complementary capabilities to the discussion. That might be co-location or network capabilities or some proprietary software or tools. So the winners will have some additional value that they bring to the table. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron to present this next section on security services.
All right, great. So I'm going to head in a new direction and take a look at the impact cybersecurity is having on managed IT service providers in particular. For most every enterprise in every industry of every size, the need for advanced security expertise has probably never been more vital. We have enterprises that are struggling with security expertise shortages. They're facing an evolving threat landscape as they're deploying a growing number of workloads and data in the cloud. The traditional network perimeter, it's disappearing, and at the same time, attacks are becoming more sophisticated, they're more malicious, more persistent, and they're more targeted. And then to top it all off, we have this increasing compliance requirements that are just continue to put pressure on organizations of all types. So as a result, the enterprises are now expecting cybersecurity to be a part of almost any service provider offering. But for managed IT service providers in particular, having security services in their service catalog is going to be crucial moving forward. And those that fail to adapt and deliver security services, I'm afraid they're going to find themselves at a significant disadvantage in the market. As we saw in Liam's slide a moment ago, the customer demand for security skills and services is growing, and this is creating an opportunity for managed IT service providers, an opportunity for them to increase revenue, acquire new business, and really strengthen their position as that trusted advisor that they've established with their current customer base. Most MSPs have been offering a subset of managed security services for some time. Services like managed firewall, managed antivirus, web content filtering. Those are some of the common services that have been offered by managed IT service providers. They just really haven't traditionally packaged or marketed those services under the umbrella of managed security services. But with the shift, and we're seeing many MSPs now looking to offer a more comprehensive suite of advanced managed security services, services like SIEM, vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, public cloud security management are just a few of the more advanced areas of security services that MSPs plan to expand into over the next 12 months. But managed IT service providers, they're not the only ones looking to add security services to their portfolios. Service providers of all types are rushing in to make a play in the security services space. In just the last few weeks, we've seen moves by some large cloud providers, traditional security technology vendors, some VARs, and even system integrators. All have announced some new security offerings and services. And now often these services, they're targeted to MSPs. And so MSPs can integrate them into their service catalogs and create this broad security portfolio for their customer base. However, we're also seeing that these other types of service providers are increasingly going directly to market with their new security services. So they're competing directly with MSPs and MSSPs for a share of that managed security services market. In a recent survey, we asked MSPs that said they were planning to offer security services in the next 12 months, how were they expecting to implement these new services? And here's what they said. A majority of MSPs said, they're planning to either utilize commercial off-the-shelf software or they're going to build their own offerings in-house. Utilizing third-party cloud security services and third-party SaaS subscription services were also common paths to new security offerings. And by the way, these four totals obviously add up to more than 100% because some respondents were planning to use more than one option for their new offerings. While developing a proprietary security service can be a clear competitive advantage, this path is going to be too time-consuming and costly for many MSPs. So they're going to be looking for a mix of commercial off-the-shelf software, public cloud security services, and SaaS subscriptions as they look to roll out services quickly to gain market share and realize revenue. Now, as a side note, there are two other options that are not on this list, but they're becoming much more common. MSPs are increasingly partnering with MSSPs to deliver security services, or we're also seeing MSPs look to acquire MSSPs so they can gain its security portfolio and its expertise. Now, many security technology vendors are aggressively pursuing MSPs with programs and tools that offer key components like multi-tenancy, flexible billing and pricing, and an increasing number of integrations to common MSP tools like ticketing and help desk systems, operational management monitoring tools, and RMM systems. But one last thing for MSPs entering the managed security services market, automation and orchestration is going to be extremely crucial. MSPs are going to quickly find that the complexity of security services combined with the volume of alerts and events, it really demands integration, automation, and orchestration to be successful. It needs that automation orchestration in order to scale operations, and it's going to really need that to achieve strong long-term margins that those MSPs are striving for. So let's get to the bottom line. MSPs are going to need to move quickly, but play the long game. But most managed IT service providers, they're in this position of a trusted advisor for their customers. And because of that, their customers are often turning to them first for security services and expertise. However, they're not going to wait around for MSPs to build out their security capabilities. MSPs are going to have to move quickly so they can develop their security portfolios in order to retain their customers and capture a share of this high-demand market. And they're not going to be able to do that with just spot, disparate security services. MSPs are going to really have to invest in skill sets, human capital, and technology that's required to really adapt to this changing threat landscape in a hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure. And as we just mentioned, MSPs must maximize efficiency with automation and orchestration. Can't really stress this enough. Managed security services demands a level of automation and orchestration that exceeds anything most MSPs have currently attempted. So let me put it this way, because automation and orchestration is so critical, we've seen many MSPs have really moved beyond this best-in-class approach when it comes to adding services to their portfolio. And more often, they're opting now for this best integrated suite approach. And this approach consolidates security services with a unified platform with most or all the services being delivered as a service from the cloud. MSPs are recognizing this route provides many benefits, including scalability, faster time to market, shorter provisioning times, faster revenue recognition. Then we also have back-end infrastructure to procure, manage, and upgrade and support. And maybe most importantly, it more easily enables a high level of automation, orchestration, and correlation across the entire portfolio of security services that are offered. Now, this trend is going to produce some winners and losers, and some are pretty obvious. I think winners will be MSPs that target the SMB market. Historically, SMBs have been either ignored or they just fail to address cybersecurity risks facing their organizations. And historically, they've been slow to spend on cybersecurity, but we're seeing that tide is changing. And with over 80% of SMBs have reported that they're increasing their cybersecurity spend over the next 12 months. So SMB-focused MSPs, those that have established themselves as those trusted advisors, and those that can lead their customers on a security maturity journey, I think they're going to find security services will be a big boost to the bottom line. Another winner will be security technology vendors that enable MSPs. So security technology vendors that can quickly evolve to offer MSPs that flexible billing we talked about, subscription terms, lower operational costs, and differentiated services, while also enabling MSPs to deliver in-depth intelligence and insight. They're going to have enormous growth potential. But there's also going to be some losers as we move forward, and the first are going to be MSPs that fail to offer customers a broad suite of security services. Most enterprises, they've indicated that they prefer service providers that can provide an integrated platform with a broad range of technologies and capabilities. Because enterprises, they're not looking to trade a dozen of non-integrated security or disparate security tools for a dozen disparate non-integrated security service providers. So, MSPs that offer a limited scope of services, those that just kind of add complexity and overhead, and they're going to leave gaps in the customer security posture, they're going to really lose in this new paradigm. And unfortunately, I think many MSPs that go down this road and look to introduce security services, they're going to fail to recognize that the demand that security services will put on their organizations. MSPs are experiencing all these nuances of delivering managed services, but managed security services really introduces a new model of services that requires a different set of skills and tools and processes to effectively address the enterprise security needs. So, MSPs that fail to invest in security-specific platforms and expertise and automation, they're going to fail to service customers. They're going to fail to maintain healthy margins, and they're going to fail to remain competitive. So with that, I'm going to hand that back over to Liam for this next trend.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. I lost the unmute button there for a second. So while we see this overall sort of movement of some workloads toward public cloud platforms, this shift is by no means sort of an absolute shift. There's a lot of nuance in how businesses are choosing to execute workloads, and most of that depends on the requirements of the application, the dependencies, the latency requirements, the need to isolate particular sensitive parts of data, and of course also the needs of that particular business. So that might include, cost, including the need to recognize existing investments in hardware or facilities leases or software licenses. It also might be the need to meet compliance or regulatory requirements that have specific, single tenancy requirements or data residency requirements, or other organizational policies around data security or isolation that aren't necessarily regulatory related, but they're hard and fast rules within that particular organization. For many businesses, the sort of answer to all of these challenges is a hybrid IT environment that includes on-premises components as well as off-premises or cloud environments. And this may lead to advantages related to workload portability or support for an application development lifecycle where things are being developed in-house and then deployed into the cloud. Or it may even include, hybrid applications that are being deployed across multiple different environments. But of course, with this sort of broad, spread out hybrid IT environment becomes further complexity, and supporting this overall hybrid IT picture will be one of the key challenges of supporting these businesses as they transform. Sorry, let me just advance that. So in Voice of the Enterprise, we ask businesses what their future IT plans look like. And most respondents, and that's 55% in that top bar there, tell us that their future IT strategy includes both on-premises and hosted or cloud resources that are sort of integrated and interoperable to allow for workload portability, or to allow for cost benefits, or to allow for sort of seamless delivery of functions across those environments. For many reasons, including some of those I mentioned just a moment ago, most businesses see this hybrid IT environment as the path forward. This represents an opportunity for the service provider at the planning and design level, in sourcing and operating these various infrastructure platforms, in supplying and managing connectivity, in offering hybrid cloud management tools and other components. The portion of businesses that expects a hybrid IT future increases, and you can see this at the bottom here, increases with company size. And by company size, in this case, I mean headcount, which is sort of to be expected. As larger businesses and older businesses, they're more likely to have those existing investments in on-premises or legacy systems. They're more likely to have existing ways of doing things that they don't necessarily want to jump out of right away. So you can see here that as you get to sort of the 10,000 plus employee headcount size of business, it's at the point where 70% say that their expectations for a hybrid IT future. For enterprises, enabling the complete hybrid picture requires them to integrate across this sort of large set of components, and includes considerations across hardware, orchestration software, public and private cloud platforms, data centers, network and application architecture. There's using all these different infrastructure environments at the same time, and there's using them all sort of interoperably and using them together. It's the real challenge of hybrid. And few service providers actually possess the capabilities that are necessary to support and secure the entire hybrid cloud landscape from end to end. And rather than trying to force fit customers into environments that don't suit their needs, the step that service providers need to take and need to recognize in terms of, or the step they need to take in terms of recognizing their role is to understand that they sit in this larger ecosystem of services and really develop a strategy that addresses hybrid through partnership. And so the opportunity there is for them to fill the parts of that hybrid IT puzzle that they're capable of providing, and understanding where they need to go out and partner to address some of those other components. It may be as simple in some cases as saying, okay, well, we're going to resell AWS or Azure to fill the public cloud component. It may be more complex, where they're delivering a unique sort of software solution that intertwines with several other different providers. There's also the difference between a service provider that can sort of step up and provide most of that picture and needs to go outside and seek out partners that can sort of address specific sort of point solutions with sort of to fill in the gaps, or are you the service provider that actually ends up, stepping in to address a specific need in the bigger picture on a sort of a project or an engagement that's actually led by another service provider. So, here we asked businesses what kinds of additional capabilities would add value to a provider of cloud enablement services. As you can see, there's a strong preference for connectivity services at the top there, then hosted private cloud, as well as co-location services and the ability to extend managed services onto the customer premises. And it's worth noting here that most businesses don't require or request that their cloud management platforms be proprietary to the service provider. As I sort of started to allude to, hybrid IT is kind of a puzzle, and it's an important that the service provider recognize how much of that puzzle it is able to complete on its own, and what pieces it will have to partner to complete. Or if, in fact, its most effective role is in really very effectively filling in one smaller piece of that puzzle under the umbrella of another service provider. Service providers that have these broad service portfolios that include data center facilities, that include telco services, or some managed infrastructure firms, they may be in a better position to sort of serve as that primary vendor to their to their customers, sort of enabling public cloud alongside existing hosted private cloud or co-location services. Service providers that specialize in one or a few services may be more effective serving as kind of an add-in to those larger engagements. So, partnership and understanding the bigger picture is really essential to sort of completing that hybrid IT picture. So let's look at just a few quick takeaways from this trend. Service providers should be very conscious of how they fit into that technology ecosystem, where they can support other service providers, where they're going to need to enlist the support of other service providers, and they should make their specializations key to their approach to partnership. So if they have a specific skill set or a specific capability, and they focus on emphasizing that capability, it will become much clearer how they should partner and with whom. So as far as winners and losers are concerned, the losers here are pretty straightforward. Very, very, very few businesses can cover the whole technology landscape, and businesses that try to go it alone will simply be offering incomplete solutions, leaving customers to fill in the gaps with other providers that either aren't their partners or will take over as the sort of main partners. And of course, service providers that just simply do a bad job of partnering, defining roles and responsibilities, outlining accountability, are just going to place those burdens on the customer, and that'll end up being pretty ineffective. The winning service providers in this space will just sort of fill in the gaps in their own offerings with partners that are focused on specific applications or on specific core capabilities like facilities and network. Or advanced platform capabilities like the sort of AI and machine learning functions of a particular public cloud platform. It'll also be important for these service providers to recognize that they're partnering with companies that may compete with them on other fronts or on other deals, and just be able to successfully navigate the challenges of these relationships without undermining them and without passing any of that burden on to the customer. So here again, I'll pass it back to Aaron to cover this section.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be no surprise that enterprises are increasingly shifting their IT spend from hardware and software to managed and cloud services. This shift is becoming a new norm in how enterprises are procuring and consuming technology. But this change is also disrupting the traditional IT distribution channel, probably like any other change before. While most organizations will not be moving to 100% public cloud infrastructure in the near future, enterprises are, as Liam just pointed out, increasingly adopting a hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure that consists of infrastructure spread across multiple clouds, data centers, and on-prem environments. And this hybrid infrastructure is compounding the complexity of managing, in securing and protecting these disparate workloads and data. And this move to hybrid infrastructure is really picking up pace. Our Voice of the Enterprise surveys have revealed that enterprises are planning a significant decrease in traditional on-premise IT infrastructure over the next 2 years, as most organizations plan to increase their cloud consumption. This shift is really influencing large portions of enterprise IT decisions. If you take the expertise shortages that enterprises have in cloud technologies and platforms and take the shortages that they have in security skills, and then let's multiply that by the increasing demands of the enterprise to implement digital transformation initiatives at really a tenacious rate, it's really easy to see how the demands and the desires of the enterprise are quickly outpacing the abilities of most organizations. So as a result, enterprises are increasingly partnering with service providers to achieve their long-term goals. Now, organizations are altering their traditional route of buying more devices and applications and tools to manage and protect their organization's workloads, data, and users. Let's take security, for example. So according to our VOTE Information Security Budgets and Outlook survey, enterprises report that software and hardware security tools represented about 50% of their total security-related spending about 2 years ago. That percentage dropped to 41% last year, and respondents indicated that software and hardware security tools will continue to represent a smaller portion of their overall security spend in 2019. So while some of that spending has shifted to people, including employees and contractors, most of it has been reallocated to third-party supply services. And this shift is also taking place in other areas of technology and operational management. Many technology vendors are recognizing the shift, and they're embracing service providers as a significant part of the future path to market. These vendors have discovered that service providers are not only a force multiplier for their sales efforts, but service providers also enable them to enter untapped market and industries and really minimize their support requirements. Technology vendors that are slow to adapt to this new paradigm, I think they're going to find themselves quickly without a market to serve. So again, we have several takeaways for this trend. First, our recommendations. It's obvious, technology vendors should embrace service providers, but maybe not necessarily become them. Seeing this increasing market opportunity, some technology vendors are deciding to become service providers themselves and bypass the pure play service providers as a way to the enterprise. But delivering managed services, that's difficult, and vendors really should carefully consider their abilities before they enter this playing field. I think most technology vendors are going to find greater success with go-to-market strategies, partner programs, pricing, and capabilities focused on delivering their technology and products to the service provider market. But at the same time, technology vendors are going to really need to reevaluate their partner programs and refactor them for this new marketplace. Many service providers report that traditional vendor partner programs fail to meet their needs, that they're overburdensome, that they're complex, and really have a minimal return. Service providers said that they really prefer simple and flexible programs that value their performance, investment, and customer acquisition rates over certification requirements and revenue-based thresholds. So as service providers start really overtaking the enterprise in the future as a principal channel for technology vendors, there'll also be some winners and losers. I think it's clear that technology vendors that embrace the service market will be a winner, but I think this shift will be really a big boost for those technology vendors that really have a limit to its sales reach. I think these technology vendors are discovering that service providers are not only that force multiplier for their sales efforts, but as we mentioned a moment ago, it's going to really enable them to enter untapped markets and industries with really minimal support requirements and effort. But enterprises are going to benefit from this new paradigm as well. They're short on staff, they're short on expertise. Enterprises are struggling to manage and secure and monitor this increasingly hybrid and multi-cloud environment. So enterprises are going to benefit greatly from this healthy, competitive service provider market. Leveraging service providers for a subset of their enterprise IT services is really going to free up internal staff for more strategic initiatives. Enterprises are going to spend less time and resources worrying about the technology and really focus more on the outcome that these service providers can deliver. But there's also going to be a few losers in this market. Old habits are really kind of hard to break, and product and technology vendors that remain solely focused on the end user and the enterprise and accustomed to selling traditional hardware and software to the enterprise, they're going to find this market shift to selling to and through the service providers unnerving. And as I said a moment ago, those that fail to embrace this shift, they really may find themselves without a diminishing market to serve. And finally, vendors that fail to refactor their technology or products for a service-based world, and they're going to have a difficult time in the days ahead. I think the evolving cloud and managed services landscape requires products and technology that can provide flexible building and consumption models, advanced monitoring, logging and analytics, and delivery from the cloud on demand. These capabilities are particularly valuable to service providers that are looking to leverage a vendor's products and technology across a diverse customer base. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Liam for our final trend.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So I realize that we're at the top of the hour here. I know we had scheduled an hour for this call. I suspect if I go a little quickly through this next one, it'll take less than 5 minutes. However, I do understand if some folks need to drop off. I'll just remind you that we will have a recording of the call. So if you'd like to revisit this last section at another time when you have more time, you can do that. Without further ado, I'll just sort of go through this last trend here. So I have mentioned specialization as an aspect of each of the other trends I've discussed, and how service providers can sort of lean into their specialties as they develop their strategies for cloud enablement or for managing hybrid IT. In this section, we want to talk about this as a more explicit service provider strategy, and how they should focus on cultivating and developing specific areas of expertise as a means of standing out, not only to their customers, but to the platforms that they support. So earlier in this discussion, we looked at how service providers from a wide variety of categories are getting involved in this cloud enablement process. The ability to stand out from that market will rely more and more on specialized capabilities that connect with customers, including the basics of sort of geography and vertical market. But two key avenues of opportunity here are really going to rely on specializations that are related to either specific applications that are running in the customer environment and how those can be executed successfully in sort of migrated and executed on public cloud, and as well as building new things out of the advanced features and functions of the cloud platforms that these customers are adopting. So respondents to the Voice of the Enterprise study indicate that plans to adopt the advanced functions of public cloud are in pretty high numbers during the next year. So the functions that show the strongest adoption plans include machine learning, which is in plan for about 27% of businesses using public cloud, as well as containers and container management tools at 19%, data analytics tools at 18%, and serverless functions at 16%. So by building repeatable commercial processes and frameworks around modernizing some of these difficult to migrate enterprise applications. So, for instance, we see, service providers that have an important role in the partner ecosystems of some of these cloud platforms, being specialists in, Oracle Business Suite or in SAP, or in some cases in sort of vertical specific applications. So things like, electronic health record software in the healthcare space. Some of these things are where, once they've addressed the sort of low-hanging fruit of modernization, that some of these businesses really hit a wall and say, now is when I need someone to come in and help me figure out what I'm going to do with all the SAP stuff that I'm running on premises and how I'm going to execute that in the cloud. And so there's a partnership aspect there that is with, obviously, the software company and the cloud platform. Or those service providers that are able to sort of execute IT projects that combine some of those next generation technologies, such as AI and machine learning. These service providers will be able to sort of stand out not only as offering a kind of a unique value to the customer, but also as a sort of a valuable and reliable partner to the channel ecosystems of the cloud platforms and the software partners that the software vendors that they partner with. And Standing out to the, in the other way, to the vendor that you're partnered with, has a couple of useful benefits that are likely to turn it into a reliable source of new business. If the cloud platform vendor knows it can reliably turn to a certain service provider within its partner program to address a specific requirement, to building an IoT implementation that has a sort of a generic template that can be applied in specific ways, that is likely to turn into repeat opportunities for that service provider, whether it is as a sort of lead on a given project, or being brought into a larger engagement that includes other partners. So for service providers, especially in that medium-sized or smaller range, having the upstream partner or the sort of platform vendor look to them as a partner that they can bring into deals really extends the reach of their own sales and marketing efforts exponentially, which can have an incredible value for a service provider that might not have a lot of name recognition or a lot of notoriety. And this is kind of a lateral step, but what I wanted to illustrate with this chart is that cloud adoption, cloud enablement, and the consumption of these services is not necessarily like a single point offering or a single vendor kind of offering, and it's also not kind of a static state. So more than 60% of public cloud users tell us that they have multiple public cloud vendors in place, and that's just at the platform level. They're also buying managed services independently from the infrastructure platforms on the basis, in many cases, of what projects demand. And very few of them tell us that they're consolidating their spending down to a smaller number of vendors or a smaller set of vendors. About a third of respondents tell us that they want to spread their spending out more across their existing vendors, or extend it to include new vendors. And some of this is driven by new projects demanding specialized expertise. So it isn't a zero-sum game. There are opportunities for service providers to join the existing mix for new customers or customers that are new to them. However, that window looks like it might be narrowing a bit over time as the enterprises or the businesses, do their experimentation, do their due diligence, and decide on the partners that they want to work with. Compared to a year ago, fewer businesses describe plans to spread their spending around, and more of them report that they've found a mix that they plan to stick with. So they want to keep their spending the same in terms of the spread across vendors. So service providers shouldn't necessarily regard this idea of enabling transformation as an opportunity that will stick around forever. Businesses are sort of locking in their bets with vendors over the next couple of years, and I think it's really an important time for them to sort of strike while the iron is hot. So some key takeaways from this, the application or technology specialization can help service providers stand out both up and down the supply chain. Our recommendations for service providers are really to ensure that they have or that they develop these kind of specializations, focusing on developing skills around refactoring or migrating apps that are most challenging for customers is one of the ways to add the most value. And then, gaining proof that demonstrates that value through acquiring competencies in these platforms. Excuse me. I mean, that's, the platform competency certification is not necessarily a prerequisite to doing good work, but it can certainly help sell the capability to the customer. And it's also likely to drive additional engagement with the platform vendor. Going out and getting the certifications, helps to put you on the radar of the platform vendor. So in terms of winners and losers here, as the path to the adoption of these services becomes less generalized and more project-based or technology-driven at the customer end, this generalist approach to enablement would become less valuable or will become less valuable. And of course, even less valuable than that is a specialized service from a provider that doesn't actually possess the specialized understanding of the market it's targeting. So, for service providers, just to be clear, we're not recommending that you go out and announce that you're a specialist in healthcare if you're not actually a specialist in healthcare. And the winners in this space are service providers that do a good job of turning an area of expertise into a product that they can sell over and over again. So this isn't just about understanding how to as the example I used before, is to sort of build an IoT solution. It's about automating those processing, standardizing the design components, and building something that's really repeatable that can be sort of customized on a case-by-case basis. And then, communicating that capability to the application or the platform vendors who have the customer bases and the opportunity to bring those service provider partners into large numbers of engagements. So I want to say thanks. That's everything that we had planned to go through on today's session. We had sort of planned to take some questions. Cassie, I don't know, how do we feel about spending some time on questions here? I know we're like 10 minutes past our time now.
I think we still have time to answer one or two for those that are still on the phone with us.
Okay, so Aaron, why don't you answer the question at the top of the list there? So, Aaron, you're there, right?
Yeah, I'm pulling up the list now. Sorry.
Yeah. So, Cassie, if you can open up the question, do you want to read that out to Aaron?
Yep, absolutely. So, Aaron, the question is: are SOAR functionalities for containment for MSPs and MSPs? What does that mean? Just adding in and I'm not sure if that's SOAR or OAR solution for operational efficiency to take action on behalf of the customer.
Sure, I believe I understand the question. So just for clarification, so SOAR, security, orchestration, automation, and response. That's a common terminology to refer to platforms that are targeted for security services. And they're really meant to orchestrate and automate many different phases of a security investigation and detection. As we know, enterprises are moving away from more of a preventative type of stance and are adding on detective type of stance. They know at some point they're going to be compromised and are trying to detect those compromises as quickly as possible. So security, orchestration, automation, and response platforms help us to take these increasing volumes of alerts that are coming in, allows us to get those down to a workable number that our analysts can review. But we can also, it's not just for, as your question alluded to, containment. It's on the front end as well. We want to be able to automate some of the investigative responses that, like, for example, go out and pull additional logs, go out and correlate some events for us. We can orchestrate data gathering on the front end before our analyst takes response. And really taking action on behalf of the customer as far as an automation capability, that seems to be a little bit less common. I think there's still a lot of hesitation to fully automate investigation, identification, investigation, detection, and response from end to end. Most often we will see automation on the front end, and when it is on the back end and automating response, maybe that's changing a rule on a firewall or implementing some containment measures on an endpoint. There's typically going to be some human decision points in there before those actions are automatically taken. I think there's a lot of fears we're going to take critical systems offline, and we want to consider other factors that are part of that. So I hope I'm answering the question correctly. SOAR functionalities are more than just containment. They're really to help make the overall process of threat detection faster and more scalable from end to end.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks for the background for my own benefit. I'm still learning so much about security these days. So, Liam, is there one more question? Do you think we have time for one more?
Yeah, so let's do the second question down. So I can read it out because I've been reading through it here. But and by the way, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who did submit a question. We tried to answer a couple of them via the tool. I think a couple of them may have been answered just by the progression of the session. And for anyone who has a question that's sort of in there that doesn't get answered right now, we will follow up with you after after the session via email, just because I think in some cases there's a useful conversation to be had there as well. But so the one other question I wanted to address was, do you see public cloud vendors such as AWS or Google, et cetera, either developing hybrid or multi-cloud management capabilities or acquiring cloud management platforms, for example, companies like Cloudability? So that's an interesting question. I think the answer is it's certainly possible. I do think that for quite a long time, the sort of the AWS view, and maybe not to quite as much an extent the Google view and not so much the Microsoft view, but for a while AWS's view was that hybrid cloud wasn't really something that it wanted to address, that its view was that everything was going to end up on public cloud eventually, or that everything was going to end up on AWS eventually. And I think that's something that they've sort of adjusted their viewpoint on. You've seen the partnerships with VMware that are extending the companies' respective technologies in both directions. You've seen up to and including the sort of Outpost announcement at reInvent last year, where they said they're going to have sort of a AWS node that you can run on premises in your data center, really just sort of getting involved with the idea of hybrid. What I wanted to say in regard to your specific question, which is what would they develop or buy a hybrid cloud management capabilities, I think it's very likely that they would develop some of those capabilities. One interesting thing that we see out of the Voice of the Enterprise survey research is we ask about cloud management platforms. We ask if you have just a cloud management platform in place, not necessarily a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud management tool, but and then we ask them, who is the maker of that tool? Where are you sourcing that tool from? And the largest portion of that respondents, and I think it may be the majority of the response, although I can't remember off the top of my head, I know it's the largest portion, says that they're just using the management functions, the native management functions of the cloud platform as their main cloud management tool. So I think that, the reason to consider that a possibility is that among customers, that the customers of public cloud using cloud management tools, their sort of go-to source for that tool is the platform itself. So I think the platform vendors have an opportunity given the sort of role that they play in the tooling already. So I mean the other aspect of that question is that it's it's dependent on quite a few things. I think it's certainly something that they're all thinking about.
All right, thanks, Liam. Thanks, guys, for taking some additional time after this webinar to answer those questions. And thank you for those of you that stuck through after the fact. And we hope that those that had to leave us this afternoon come back later to catch the recording, which should be posted shortly after we finish in the next couple of minutes. Before I do, I just want to let people know that if you do want to access that recording, you would want to come back to the link that you attended the webinar live today with, and just refill out your information or select already registered, and you'll be transported directly to the recording. With that, I think we're all set. Thank you, Liam and Aaron, for your time, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to catching you next time.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. And apologies for running late.